Good morning. We've entered back into ordinary time. We don't call it ordinary because it's boring or it's ordinary or it's mid or it's not amusing, but because it is the ordered or counted time of the church year. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 27th, 34th Sunday in ordinary time. And we wear green because just like green reminds us of creation, of plants that grow during season, we are called to grow during this season of the year as disciples of the Lord. And so every week we're presented with different aspects of our discipleship and our following Jesus and what that means for us and how we reconcile our faith with what we live out in our day-to-day life. Once we leave Mass, once we go back into the world, and how it is that we can grow as disciples and mature as disciples of the Lord. And I love how the Word of God is alive, and it speaks very much into our life and how it is that we're experiencing the world every day. All we have to do is just turn on the news to get flooded with suffering. With human suffering, with the wars going on in the Middle East, and the many innocent people who are suffering because of it. The many Christians, our brothers and sisters in the faith, who are being persecuted and killed because they are Christians in Africa. The priests in Myanmar who got killed recently. We don't have to go too far. How about in our very own state? Maybe 3-4 hours down the road. How many innocent people suffering because of the devastating floods in the hill country. And a lot of these are young, innocent girls in a Christian summer camp. How about here at home? This past weekend, we had a very heartbreaking funeral for a not even 2-year-old who died. And then we look at our own lives and the suffering that we face. And then we're asked, where is God in the midst of all of that? We can take the stance of Martha in the gospel when we face this idea of suffering. Lord, do you not care? You who are all powerful, you who are all loving, supposed to be loving, do you not care that those whom you love are suffering? That's probably one of the toughest things about suffering. That we tend to believe the lie that we're alone and that God doesn't care. Because He can do something about it and He doesn't. He's supposed to love us, and yet I'm still here going through these most difficult moments of my life. Why would He? What is the point of it all? Why are we suffering? Why would God allow these innocent girls to die in these devastating floods? Or this not even 2-year-old pass away? How do you respond to that? And our first instinct is try to grab control of something, so we need somebody to blame. God just ends up being the easiest target. You can do something about it, why don't you? It's your fault. Now I'm mad at you and I'm going to walk away. And He becomes the easy scapegoat whenever things get hard. Blame God. The temptation to ask, Lord, why don't you care? Why don't you do something about it? And then I'm reminded of the response that God gave to Job whenever he was suffering. This just man who did not deserve suffering because of his sin. He was a good and just man, and yet he suffered. He lost everything, even his good health. And then he was trying to be faithful. He was trying to hold on until he broke. And then he got upset. Lord, why? And God does not answer with a solution or an answer. Because when we suffer, we might think that we're looking for an answer. But that does nothing for us. I wouldn't dare to go up to that mother this past week and tell her, actually, your son died because of this and because of this and because of this. What's she supposed to do with answers? What are we supposed to do with answers whenever we suffer? They do nothing for us. We're still suffering. We're still grieving. Again, our desire for control to try to make it better wants to blame somebody and find answers. Why and how can I fix it? But suffering is a being that experience that great mystery that we will not control. There's no possible way for us to control, and that's part of what makes it so hard on top of everything else. And we're supposed to accept it? But God, why? You're supposed to be good. You're supposed to love me. Why do I suffer? Do you not care? And then we read in the second reading how somehow St. Paul gets to the point of saying that he rejoices in his sufferings, that somehow he fills what is lacking in the suffering of Christ. What lacks in the suffering of Christ? Nothing. The answer is nothing. Christ's sacrifice was perfect. He doesn't need us. But when we read that further, we find in that reading an invitation for us. JP2 delves deep into the Christian meaning of our suffering in his document Salvifici Doloris. And he says that it becomes an invitation for us by taking on, being offered just a sliver of the cross that he himself bore. That we can participate in the redemptive act of Christ and his suffering. The redemptive act of Christ. That he didn't bring about salvation and redemption through his teachings. That's not what saves us. We're not saved by his miracles or his signs and wonders. How were we saved? Through his suffering and his death. For some reason, God found it necessary or good to use suffering and death to bring about life and salvation. He could have snapped his finger. All right, you're good. Let's start over, do better. But he didn't. That wasn't enough for him. His love, just like the nature of love is, desired to do more. And there's his response. Lord, do you not care that I'm suffering? There's a response to Job with his questions. If I didn't care, would I have created this universe for you? If I didn't care, would I have created you? If I didn't care, would you still be alive right now and existing? If I didn't care, why would I not just snap my finger instead of becoming man? If I didn't care, why did I become man? If I didn't care, why did I live your life in all things like you except for sin, to show you how to live faithfully with God into salvation? If I didn't care, why did I take on the worst possible suffering, taking evil upon myself to redeem you? If I didn't care, why did I die on that cross? If I didn't care, why would I continue to offer myself to you on the holy altar, my body and blood, to nourish you, to strengthen you, to be one with you, to give you the strength to continue fighting and the grace to be faithful? If I didn't care, why would I do any of those things? So we can't possibly say that God doesn't care. Then why doesn't he do something? Why doesn't he stop it? We don't have the answer. What do we know? That for some reason, suffering becomes the most intimate point of contact between God and man. That is only when we find ourselves broken and weak and suffering and vulnerable that we finally look up and realize that we have a God who loves us and open ourselves up to Him. In our suffering, we don't need answers. They don't do anything for us. In our suffering, our hearts yearn for the promise of a person. The promise of the person. The God who loved us to death. This is a very hard teaching. This is a very hard pill to swallow. Because we try to look in God, in all of the answers and solutions to life. And we find that in this case, suffering is not eliminated. But what does happen? Because of that love, now our suffering is not needless and pointless. Our suffering has a purpose. Our suffering can become redemptive and salvific by uniting it to Him and to that suffering. That He asks us to join Him in our suffering. He doesn't just give us a cross, wishes us luck, and don't drown, see you on the other side. He says, join me, follow me, because who is already crucified to that cross? But our God who loves us. We can have two responses to suffering. It is either the finding someone to blame, and most likely it will be God, and then walking away, and then losing all sense of purpose and hope in our lives. Or we can look to the cross and look at our God who tells us, I know what you are going through. I know what you are suffering because I suffered it too, so that I can suffer with you. I know the challenge, I know the difficulty, and you are not alone. You don't have to do this alone. And then we're asked if we can trust Him enough to follow Him even in the midst of our suffering, even in the midst of the pain, even in the midst of the difficulty. Because in itself, suffering has no purpose or meaning. Suffering is an evil. God doesn't will it. It's against who He is. Suffering is the effect of original sin in our lives. But He permits it. And God will never, ever permit an evil if He doesn't know that a greater good will come out of it. If He knows that a greater good will come out of it. The only way that God will permit a pain and a sorrow is because He knows a greater good will come out of it. And He did it Himself, where He brought life out of death, light out of darkness, goodness out of evil, so that then we can find purpose and comfort in our suffering. Because we're going to suffer. That's part of being human beings. Now it's up to us if we want to suffer with love and hope or not. And I'll finish by using our very own Father Ryan's words. It's not enough to know God's will, and it's not enough to do God's will. We're called to love God's will.